Thank you to each and every one of you for your service to our country. I want to return to some of the comments made by Senator Warren and looking at over the last 20 years. I think if ever we're going to have a strategic assessment of what happened in Afghanistan, it's important in any kind of strategic assessment is not just to look at the present, but to look at the past and look at the future and look at all three of those elements as we're making that kind of assessment. And if we're going to do that, we have to look over the last 20 years that we were in Afghanistan, and we're going to have a pretty hard-nosed assessment of that. General Milley, you mentioned that. Strategic decisions have consequences, and there are a lot of lessons to be learned over 20 years of our involvement in Afghanistan. I sat at this table here at the Armed Services for many years, served in the House before, had an opportunity to travel to Afghanistan on a couple of occasions. And whenever we've ever asked our military leaders the situation in Afghanistan, we often heard, well, it's a stalemate right now, but this year coming up is going to be different. This year will be different. I heard that year after year. This year is going to be different. I know we were in a stalemate, but this year is going to be different. There's one commentator has said, and Secretary Austin, I want you to comment on this. He said that we didn't really have a 20-year war in Afghanistan. We had 21-year wars in Afghanistan. How would you respond to that?
I would certainly say, Senator, that's something to think about. You've heard me say in my opening comments, we have to ask ourselves some tough questions. Did we have the right strategy? Did we have too many strategies? And so if you're recooking or reshaping that strategy every year, 1 year at a time, then that has consequences. So I think that's something we got to go back and look at. And we also have to look at the impact, the effect of the corruption that was in the environment, weak leadership, changes in leadership, and a number of factors.
Well, I want to build on that because I think it's important, Secretary Austin. For example, General Milley, when you commanded NATO ground forces in Afghanistan 8 years ago, you called 2013 a critical year for the Afghan security forces because it was the first time they'd taken responsibility for their security across the country. Secretary Austin, you offered similar assessments in 2015 and 2016 during testimony before this committee. As CENTCOM commander, you emphasized that there were 326,000 ANSF forces and they were ready to lead security operations. And I'll just say, from also my experience, especially when I was in Afghanistan, the input that I got from our commanders was that this year is going to be different. We're going to be able to do things better. But I got a completely different assessment when I went to the mess hall and ate with the soldiers and the Marines and the folks on the ground who said, I don't trust these folks that we're with. I don't know if they're going to fight. In fact, they don't even show up. They get their paycheck, but they don't show up. And now there may have been some instances where they've performed, and I know you've highlighted some of those. But my question from a strategic standpoint is, did we just become fixated perhaps on some tactical performance from our forces, their forces, and forget to measure the Afghan security forces' actual institutional health as a fighting force that could sustain a fight, even though they're in an incredibly weak economy and a whole host of complicated cultural issues?
Clearly questions that we have to drill deep on. At one point, as you know, Senator, we had a number of advisors down to fairly low levels. As we began to lift the numbers of advisors that we had there and scale back on the people that we had interfacing with the Afghans on a daily basis, we began to lose that fingertip feel. And so our ability to assess with some degree of certainty continue to erode the smaller that we got.
My sense is that was what we were hearing for years. It wasn't just at the end, that this is an endemic problem for over a decade. So hopefully we will have the opportunity to do that. That's my final question, Secretary Austin. What are we actually doing to learn from the conclusion of these military operations, just particularly from a strategic assessment point of view when it comes to end of conflict transition? We're going to have potentially other operations like this even in great power competition.
Yeah, so as we always do, Senator, we're going to take a hard look at ourselves in terms of, what we did over the last 20 years, what worked, what didn't work, and we're going to learn from those lessons and make sure that we incorporate that into our planning and our strategic assessment going forward.
Thank you.